What if the two letters to the Corinthians in your Bible aren't two letters? They might be four, and two of them are missing. Paul wrote letters to Corinth that no one alive has ever read. They're gone. And the letters that did survive, they show signs of being stitched together from separate documents. Let's reconstruct the full picture. Like, how many letters did Paul write to Corinth? Here's the full sequence. First, Paul sent what scholars call the prior letter. We know it existed because Paul mentions it directly in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 9. I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. That letter predates 1 Corinthians. It's lost. Second came 1 Corinthians itself, Paul's long response to reports and questions from the community. The letter we explored in previous videos, 2 down. But Paul wasn't finished writing to this church, not even close. Third came the Tearful Letter. Paul references it in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 4. I wrote you out of great distress and anguish of heart and with many tears. Something terrible happened between 1st and 2nd Corinthians, a confrontation, a betrayal, a crisis severe enough to make Paul weep as he wrote. That letter is also lost. Fourth came 2nd Corinthians, the letter we have in our Bibles, so the canonical two letters are really windows into 4 or more distinct moments in a long turbulent relationship. And the 2nd Corinthians itself has a problem. Read 2 Corinthians chapters 1 through 9. Paul sounds warm, relieved, grateful. He celebrates reconciliation with the community. He writes, I have great confidence in you. I have great pride in you. The crisis appears resolved. Now read chapters 10 through 13. Paul erupts. He's furious, defensive, dripping with sarcasm. He's fighting for his apostolic life. These don't read like the same letter. The mood shift is jarring, almost inexplicable if this is one document. Many scholars conclude 2 Corinthians is a composite letter, a single document in our Bible assembled from 2 or more originally separate letters by a later editor. Someone collected Paul's correspondence, and at some point these distinct letters were stitched together into one scroll. The seam between chapters 9 and 10 is where the stitching shows. This means our 2 canonical letters to Corinth preserve fragments of a much larger, messier conversation, one we can only partially reconstruct. But the real drama isn't about lost letters, it's about what the surviving ones reveal. In those angry final chapters of 2 Corinthians, Paul faces his most dangerous opponents yet. He sarcastically calls them the super apostles. Who were they and why was their attack so dangerous? These rival missionaries arrived in Corinth and attacked Paul's credibility with a specific accusation. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 10 preserves it. His letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech contemptible. To modern ears, that sounds like a minor insult. In the ancient world, it was devastating. In Greco-Roman culture, rhetoric, the art of public persuasion, was a core element of elite education and a direct marker of social standing. Powerful oratory signaled elite birth, advanced training, high status, and legitimate authority. Weak, unpolished speaking signaled the opposite: low birth, no education, servile origins, unfit to lead. The super apostles weren't just calling Paul a bad speaker, they were calling him low class, fundamentally unqualified for the authority he claimed. This was the same social status fault line running through every conflict in 1 Corinthians. Rich versus poor at the Lord's Supper, the wisdom of the educated versus the foolishness of the cross, eloquent Apollos versus unpolished Paul. The class war never ended. The super apostles simply weaponized it more directly. And Paul's response, he didn't try to out-eloquence them. He flipped the hierarchy entirely. He boasted of his weaknesses, his suffering, his hardships. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10, when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul redefined what qualifies an apostle, not eloquence, not elite credentials, suffering, endurance, and faithfulness under pressure. He took the very thing his opponents used to disqualify him and turned it into his primary credential, and the status ladder got inverted. So after all of this, the factions, the scandals, the tearful letters, the rival apostles, what happened to the Corinthian church? It survived. More than survived. Around 96 CE, roughly 40 years after Paul's letters, Clement of Rome wrote to this same community. First Clement, an early Christian letter not in the New Testament but historically significant, addresses the Corinthian church and calls it an ancient and great church. 40 years of silence in our sources. Then this: recognition, respect, endurance confirmed. The community that nearly tore itself apart over factions, lawsuits, and rival leaders became a model church in the early Christian world. Early Christianity was not a smooth, unified movement. It was forged in conflict, doctrinal, ethical, social, personal. The Corinthian correspondence gives us the most detailed window into that messy human process. 4 letters, 2 lost, 1 likely stitched together, all revealing a community under constant pressure. And the fact that this church survived tells us something important. Communities don't have to be conflict-free to be enduring. They just have to keep working through it.